Hi guys, welcome back to another Hugh video. In this video, I'm going to be creating a custom Nintendo Switch console in a transparent retro Game Boy style. With this, I aim to pair the best of classic and modern Nintendo into this one console. As it stands, this is a matte black Switch in perfect condition with a screen protector already installed. Although this protector has a small chip, but the screen underneath is undamaged. I purchased this console off Gumtree recently. When I went to pick it up, the seller recognized me from YouTube and even wanted a photo with me, which truly made my day. Thanks, mate. Included with it was all the original packaging and accessories, with a case and a separate charger for the Joy-Cons. To perform this customization, I'm going to need a replacement housing. This one I purchased from Amazon for a whopping $70. If fully transparent isn't your thing, you can find many different translucent colors such as purple, green, blue, and so on. You can even mix and match if you wanted something unique. Included with mine was the casing itself, some colourful buttons, and a set of screws. Unfortunately, my back panel came with a scratch from the factory. It's time to get this Switch customized, so we're going to start by powering it down and removing the Joy-Cons from the console itself. Many of the screws throughout this device are using Y000 tri-wing heads, so you're going to need a proper bit for that. Personally, I'm using the Protect toolkit from iFixit. I will leave a link to my website down in the description if you're wanting links to all the tools I'm using. I will start by removing the necessary screws from the back and sides, so we can remove the back panel. For the sides of the Switch, you only need to remove the middle screw. You can leave the others in place. With all the screws removed, we can carefully lift up on the back panel to reveal the innards. Underneath is a piece of shielding. You could theoretically remove this, although it's being used as part of the cooling system, so I'll be leaving it in place. As for that back panel we just removed, I'll need to transfer parts for the stand and game slot cover over to our new housing. Screwing back into place the game slot cover, we can install the back panel back onto the console. This kit did include new Phillips head screws, although I opted to install all of the original screws throughout the whole console. With our back panel reinstalled, of course, the console is still functional. But that's the easy part, so it's time to move over to the Joy-Cons. Now these things might look harmless, but inside there's a lot of flex cables and a lot of screws that we need to get out and swap across to our new custom casing. So I'll remove the tri-wing screws and gently pry up on the back panel, being careful of the ribbon cable connecting the two halves. I'll firstly disconnect that battery and get it out of the way, as it's held in with some light adhesive. There's a couple of screws which will need to be removed and some more plastic that we can lift out of the way. Before I remove it entirely, I'll need to disconnect the flex cable underneath, and then I can disconnect the two cables connecting up the two halves of this Joy-Con. Next to come out is the joystick itself, so I'll need to disconnect its cable and two screws before carefully pulling it through the gasket that's on the controller. I can remove the two Phillips head screws on the circuit board and also remove the trigger button as that fell out. Removing the board and vibration motor as one piece, I can then unscrew the final assembly up top and remove the buttons from the controller. As I mentioned earlier, extra colourful buttons were included with my case, so I'll be using them instead of the standard black ones. However, I will still be needing to use a few of the old ones too. Installing the buttons and the membrane that sits behind them, I can reinstall the circuitry back into the controller. Carefully positioning it back down into place, I can reinstall the screws, and of course not to forget to transfer the gasket for the joystick itself. Pushing that joystick back into place, we can reinstall its two Phillips head screws. It's also good to mention that if you're going to do this, to make sure to clean the inside as you're going, as you don't want to leave any fingerprints inside. Connecting up the flex cables to the motherboard, I can reinstall the trigger button, and we can move across to the other half of this Joy-Con. On this side, we'll find the connection board, which actually interfaces with the Switch itself. One screw and a little bit of adhesive will get that right out. I'll also need to transfer the button, which is the unlocking mechanism for the Switch. With some new adhesive and reinstalling the screw, that half is ready to go. It's now time to connect the two halves back together so I can reconnect the two flex cables connecting up to the main board. I'll also need to disconnect the trigger button from the old midsection of plastic and remove the 2 springs and the little button underneath. Transferring that across to our new section, I can screw it back into place, reinstall the 2 springs, and reinstall the trigger button onto this piece of plastic. While it's only clipped in place, it can be a little bit tricky to get things lined up and press it down without the springs flying out. But with a bit of patience, I managed just fine. I can reconnect the flex cable and place this midsection of plastic back into the Joy-Con. Reinstalling its 3 screws, we can use a microfiber cloth to clean any remaining dust or fingerprints inside, and then we can get the battery reinstalled and connected up. Finally, we can use the microfiber cloth again to clean up the back half of the Joy-Con and pressing the 2 halves back together. We can then reinstall the tri-wing screws, and we've successfully customized one of the Joy-Cons. I'm very happy with the outcome of this controller, so it's time to move across to the other one and get it looking just as nice. With our right controller, it's time to repeat a similar process by first removing the tri-wing screws from the bottom and using a plastic pick, unclipping the 2 halves. You'll need to be careful of the vibration motor when you do this, as you don't want to rip the fragile cables connecting it to the motherboard. Starting off, of course, I'll disconnect the battery to remove all power to the controller itself. And with the cable removed, I can pry out the battery, which, just like the previous controller, is held in with a light amount of adhesive. This time, there's a little antenna which we'll need to disconnect, as well as 3 Phillips head screws. Removing this midsection in a similar manner as before, we can disconnect its flex cable and remove it from the controller. Unclipping the latches, we can remove the 2 flex cables going to the second half. For some strange reason, they unclip in opposite directions. Proceeding further, I will remove the joystick, disconnect a couple of flex cables and get that vibration motor out of the way. I can then undo 2 Phillips head screws and lift the main circuitry out of the controller. This time, there's a couple of extra things underneath. This time around, we have a couple of sensors. From what I've found online, these 2 sensors are NFC and an infrared sensor. In a similar fashion, I'll need to transfer across the home button and the plus symbol. I'll also need to take out this NFC and infrared sensor to transfer across to our new Joy-Con housing. With everything removed, we can install it into the transparent housing. Starting with the gasket and the 2 antennas, we can then install all of the multicolored buttons. I've purposely made sure to match the position of the colored buttons on both controllers for a nice cohesive look. I also found during the reassembly process that it's easier to connect up the infrared sensor prior to installing the logic board. This just makes it much easier, as you only need to connect 1 flex cable before reinstalling the 2 Phillips screws back into place. Positioning up the vibration motor and reinstalling the joystick. Installing one of the 2 trigger buttons back into place, we can then actually start working on the second trigger button, carefully unclipping it from the middle section of plastic that we removed from the original Joy-Con controller. This was the second most complicated piece of this project, but luckily I didn't break anything during the process. I could transfer across the flex cable, screwing it down into place, reinstall the 2 springs, and press the trigger button down onto our new middle section of plastic. For the other half of the controller, I will transfer the switch's connecting mechanism and release button. Connecting up the 2 halves of the controller, we can reconnect the flex cables, locking them back into place. We can reinstall the antenna, and the hardest part of this whole project was reconnecting this flex cable for the middle section of plastic. This is because the cable itself is just so short. After about 15 minutes or so, I finally got it connected and could reinstall the 3 screws. Properly aligning the antenna, I can apply some new strips of adhesive, connect up the battery, and press it down into place. Using a microfiber cloth to clean any of the remaining dust or fingerprints, I can seal the 2 halves together, pressing them down and screwing in the tri-wing screws. The last thing that's left to do is to reconnect our controllers to our Switch and get gaming. So this is it, my custom transparent Nintendo Switch. This unique console will sure impress people who love to see the insides of electronics such as myself. I really wish manufacturers would implement designs just like this. While the device looks great and is fully functional, the glossy plastic would scratch easily, so keeping it in a protective case is a must for on-the-go gaming. The Switch was quite easy to work on for something on the market today. No hard to remove glue or tough plastic clips, just a few tamper-proof screws, which was nothing my toolkit couldn't handle. And on that note, this has been a Hugh Jeffries video. If you like what you saw, hit that subscribe button and consider checking out the custom tech playlist for more videos just like this one. And if you're looking for some helpful tips or what tools I use to repair devices, be sure to check out my website, link for which is down in the description. That's all for this video, and I'll catch you guys next time.